This is a session on how to buy lots and lots of reviews for fun and profit for your law firm. Just kidding. It is on how to do that, and also our admonishment not to do so. But Joy Hawkins, the esteemed Joy Hawkins of Local Search Everything fame, you hit both of us up because you're seeing more and more and more of this. And I'd love to get your feel of like, what tipped you off as this kind of tipping point of local reviews being purchased?
We've seen it in other industries that we work in for a long time. Like, buying
Right.
reviews is not a new thing. I definitely am seeing more of it with lawyers than I used to. I feel like in the past, I used to see that lawyers kind of shied away from doing anything too blatantly obvious because they were scared, right? Scared of what might happen to them, to their, license and all that stuff. I'm starting to see some lawyers get pretty obvious with it. So a couple cases, there was one that I was looking at where they were LSA reviews. And I mean, these things were so obvious. This lawyer's in Texas and the reviews were pouring in at such a high rate. He was getting reviews on Thanksgiving Day, and they were like reviews that all said the person had visited there in 3 years prior. So it's crazy how obvious the patterns were, how fake. There's no way they're real. There was another case I was tracking with just plain Google reviews where they went, it's a single practitioner office, personal injury lawyer. They don't get many cases, they're a pretty small firm. And back in November, they had, I think, 30 total reviews. In their market, they were competing against businesses that had 1,300, 600 on average, really high numbers. And they've gone from 30 to 130 within 2 months. And again, really obvious patterns. There's no way they're real. They're clearly bot reviews. And it's just part of me is what do you do about this? Because sure, I'll talk about this. I'm a firm believer that reporting it to Google does nothing and is a giant waste of time.
Oh, wait a second. That's what Google tells us to do.
Yeah, we can get into that. I've got lots of case studies on that. But yeah, it's just clients of ours are legitimately wondering, it's really hard to compete against because of the benefits that they get. The pros currently outweigh the cons. So it's just a question of what do you do? What are the action items that lawyers can be doing?
All right, Guy, what do you see as the cons on this, right?
Well,
where's the stick, right?
Lots of cons. So the two big, really, I guess 3 big cons. One con is this is clearly false advertising, at best at misleading advertising under, I would say, all the states' rules of professional conduct. So this is an easy case of a grievance. Problem, of course, is that the bars are not equipped to enforce this. And, it comes down to sometimes you'll see lawyers will complain about other lawyers in their area that they see doing this. Some lawyers are reluctant to report because it's a self-policing profession. I know there's conversations about making it mandatory reporting in some jurisdictions. The other big one is the FTC. The FTC actually just put out a lot of guidelines on fake reviews. They're supposed to be beefing up their enforcement actions, but haven't seen much. So you can report it to the FTC. So to Joy's point, what can you do? You can report it to the lawyer's state bar. You can send the lawyer a cease and desist with, hey, this is clearly unethical advertising under the rules. You can report it to the FTC. The FTC has a a mechanism for reporting this stuff. And Joy and I and Conrad, we talked about this when we were on the Facebook thing. And, a lot of our clients, they're like, well, look, I don't want to be the person who has to blow the whistle on this. And so, you can report it to there's some of these mechanisms you can report anonymously. Others you can't. You could, I kind of was tongue in cheek, but we've done this on behalf of clients, is you can send it to your agency and be like, or have your agency try to report it. Of course, that creates a whole slew of issues as well. But those are the big ones.
That seems like a good use of agency work, right?
It could be, but not every agency wants to jump to that fray either, right? And then the third thing, of course, that you can do is you can do court of public opinion and out them, right? You can publish hey, check out this law firm. Look what they're doing. These are clearly, obviously fake reviews. Let them defend it, right? Let them say, whatever. And, this is another thing too, a lot of these lawyers, and it's very frustrating, as both a lawyer and a digital agency owner, people will always try to pass the buck and be like, oh, my agency did this and I didn't know
that was
about
my
it.
next question.
Right.
Do either of you guys have a feel? I mean, we know agencies do this. We've got screenshots of agencies, of people who work at agencies who are reviewing lots and lots of law firms. Like, we know that is the case. How much do you guys, actually, Joy, I'd be curious your perspective on this, because Guy and I are so deep in the agency world in legal. How much of this is agency and how much of it is the lawyers doing it kind of behind their agency's back?
One case, it's 1,000% the agency, but the lawyer can't pretend they don't know. You don't go from having 30 reviews to 130 in 2 months without noticing. Like, you'll see those requests, you know they're not clients. You also can tell they're written by SEOs based on how they're written, like very similar patterns, clear patterns. You look at enough fake reviews, it's really obvious.
You're
There's no way
blaming
they
the
don't know.
agencies.
The agencies are the one posting them, but the business is paying the agency and they know what they're doing. Like, they know that these aren't real reviews. There is no way they can claim they don't know.
And Guy, if I remember correctly, you'll get the legal correct more than I will. Lawyers are now responsible for the actions of their agencies, correct?
Oh yeah, I mean, you can't delegate your ethical responsibilities, you know.
You sound like Brian Tannenbaum.
Or I always think of Eric Turkowitz is the one who really coined the outsource your marketing, outsource your ethics. But you know, look, that's what we tell them. Where it's like, hey, you got to know, you got to have transparency, you got to know what's going on. And I'll say this too, sadly, because I've seen there's lots of lawyers. We get requests all the time to do all sorts of shady stuff from the lawyers themselves. And so this idea that, in my experience, the idea that it's just agencies, it's like, come on. Like, to Joy's point, they know what's going on. At best, they're willfully ignorant and looking the other way. But at worst, like, some of these lawyers I know, and I get, you know, as a lawyer, I get these messages all the time. It's like, hey, buy 100 fake reviews. And I'm like, this is a huge problem. And, you know, not to get down into the rabbit hole, because, you know, I want this to be like tactical for folks, but this is one of the problems with Section 230, because Google has complete immunity from this. So there's no mechanism for except for the reliability of their local reviews. There's nothing driving them to do anything about this. And, you know, in fact, to Joy's point, like, on the upside, like, it helps these firms rank. I mean, rank the quantity and, you know, number, the ranking value of these reviews is helping these firms show up. And it's a huge problem. And I know I haven't checked in the recent status of this, but there was a case, because here's what happens. Everybody says, well, there's no consumer harm. It's like, are you kidding me? You hired a lawyer based on the reviews that you saw and they're all fake? Like, that's a huge consumer harm. In fact, out of all of the things that the state bars and the FTC are regulating, like, this should be a priority.
How would they regulate it? It's hard, right? Advising a bar, Guy. So let's assume some bar member is listening to this. Let's say in Florida. How would you recommend they regulate it?
Well, again, the issue is that they need something to help them identify the fake reviews. And so a lot of times it's driven by like, you know, and again, I don't want to rant too much on this, but this is the problem with a self-regulating profession, right? All the lawyers will say, well, it's the accountability of the practice to regulate the other lawyers. But, you know, to Joy's point, I think you made this point too, like, the lawyers don't want to go get a reputation for going and being the whistleblowers. You know, they don't want to go out, especially if you're a newer lawyer on the scene. Now you're getting blackballed from the community. No one wants to refer you cases and blah, blah, blah. And then you don't want to have to fight if they come after you for, you know, even though they're clearly in the wrong, like, it creates litigation issues. And so anyway, that's the problem, right? Unless somebody is going to step up and say, look, I'm going to make it a priority to start reporting these to the state bar. And the answer for the state bar is like everything else. Like, someone needs to be made an example of. Like, one of these really egregious cases, the state bar needs to take away someone's law license because of this and say, we got to put a stop to this immediately.
So if I'm a state bar, I call up Joy and I say, find me an example in California and we will make an example.
Oh my goodness, don't even call it me. Talk to Curtis Boyd. So the transparency company, there is actually a mechanism now for detecting this. So this is the great thing. I really hope this. Yeah, I really hope people from the state bar are listening, because I've talked to a few of them and their rules are really strict. And I'm like, nobody's following your rules. Like, my goodness.
Right.
The transparency company is run by a guy named Curtis Boyd, and their tool and technology is really sophisticated, very accurate. They can detect fake reviews on Google with ease. Like, you can run a report on there, and they have contracts with Secretary of State for certain states. And I read one of them. I read the one in Arizona, and it was basically saying like the state of Arizona is going to essentially use this to sue small businesses. And I got really excited when I heard that, because I was like, finally, like a mass lawsuit, where the state of Arizona sues like dozens of businesses, will get media attention. It'll scare people. It'll finally give a deterrent for buying fake reviews, but nothing's happened yet. So this is like,
Right.
a year ago. And I know these things move slowly, but that I do feel like is one thing that will maybe make a dent in this. Because right now I feel like there's no cons, like there's no like there's a lot of like threats, but there's no actual examples of
Right.
businesses suffering from doing this. In fact, there's a lot of examples of businesses gaining a ton by doing it. So I don't think that's going to change until there's actually something to be afraid of.
So
Yeah,
Joy, let me
and
ask you
I-
a question. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
I was going to say, and if you're any business owner, law firm or otherwise, that's hiring somebody, like this is a conversation that you have to have and say, look, this is off the table. I want it in writing that you're not doing this on our behalf, because, that's about as close as you're going to get to being able to have any kind of plausible deniability. That's if someone's doing this on your behalf. But, to anybody who's out there who's like, I don't know if this is a problem for me or not, like, you got to find out. You got to get to your, all your major Google business profile, all your major business listing review sites, and just go look and make sure that this isn't going on. Because I think to Joy's point, I do think that eventually it's going to catch up, especially when state attorney generals start picking this up. Because again, there is real consumer harm, real potential and actual consumer harm for people that are relying on these fake reviews, even beyond like the unfair competition. I mean, again, especially in the context of like law practice, like this is serious stuff. Like you're making a decision to hire a lawyer based on stuff that's just not true.
Joy, I have a question for you. Very tactical. I'm a lawyer. I'm a personal injury lawyer in a medium metro area. Can I compete without doing fake reviews? Or is that the hurdle at which you have to get to in order to actually play in the local game? I'm doing personal injury or criminal defense, for example.
Personal injury is by far the worst. I think to compete, you can, but you have to get aggressive and creative with your review tactics. Like I consulted with a really ethical firm for a long time, and this came up over and over the years. And initially they were, doing things like by the book, whatever. And I think over the years, they've realized that like the volume that their competitors are getting, they can't keep up with. So they kind of changed their tactics around to start asking everybody that called into the firm for a review, despite if they signed them, despite anything. Like
Right.
they started getting kind of creative with it, which I think is smart. As far as I know, that it's not any issue. It's not an issue from Google's guidelines for sure.
Right.
And I think it's sad. I think it's sad that you have to do that. I definitely don't think lawyers should go buy reviews. I hope a day is coming, but I also feel like outside of my own morality and ethics, I have a hard time defending why they shouldn't.
Right. Because it's their business, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
And
that-
like
that-
the success that I've seen from doing it is mind blowing. And to give you an example, it's slightly different. This was more fake listings than fake reviews, but probably falls into the same bucket. Somebody reached out to me a couple of years ago, and there was a lawyer in Canada who had tons of fake listings. Fake reviews always go with fake listings.
Yeah.
And they reported them. It took 4 years, and they finally did actually get somewhere, but the lawyer was fined somewhere between 40 and 80,000. I can't remember. It was under 100. And they said the amount of cases they got from those fake listings in that 4-year span was like, 10.
That is a great return on investment, right? 100
Exactly.
grand for
I'm like,
4
oh,
years of dominating
yeah.
the market.
And that's all
Do
you
that
get
all day long.
fined,
Right.
no big deal. Like, so I'm like, yeah, it's hard. Like, and Google, just so you know, like to make it, I'm not trying to be like the pessimist here. This is just the reality. Google, all they do is they take them down, and then there's nothing stopping the business from getting more. So I actually saw this with a major law firm last year. There's a huge law firm. You all know them. They lost all their reviews last year. I watched it happen, just sat there kind of eating popcorn, and like they got back to their numbers really fast. Like it did not take long. They rebounded quickly. And I've been tracking this one case that I plan on publishing this, but it wasn't the lawyer, it was in the home services vertical, and giant company, over a dozen listings, buying all the reviews. They're a horrible company, like horrible. They fail the BBB, they fail Yelp, like everything. They're actually a really bad company. So it's like consumer harm is really up there. And their average ratings on Google and Facebook are like 4s plus because they're buying reviews on both. And I've reported them multiple times to Google. I think 4 now. Google has taken down huge chunks of the reviews. They are back to their rating drops. So like, 2 or 1 star ratings. And then they get back to where they were within weeks every time. So like it's terrible. Like it's not a good solution.
And Joy,
you-
I'm really
Yeah.
okay. Joy, I'm really curious your opinion to kind of keep going on this Google thing, because is it a matter of like the Google Business Profile product is just understaffed? I mean, what's going on at Google where they're just kind of like letting this go? Because it seems to me the only pressure from Google side of things is that in the marketplace, if people start having no trust for the reviews, that could be a motivator for Google. But like, why? I mean, I know that in other contexts, people will say, well, it's, Google's trying to solve this with math, but this is like an obvious one. Like, this is a lot easier than fighting web spam, in my opinion. What's your take on like what's going on at Google?
I just think it's not a priority. And why it's not a priority, I mean, it doesn't make the money, first of all. It actually makes the money to have a higher volume of reviews, not to have a less volume of reviews. So financially, there's no incentive for them to care, and more than they do care. I'm not saying they don't care at all. They do care a little bit, but like, are they dedicating tons of resources to it? I don't think so. I think that it's the same problem though that Amazon has Facebook. It's not just Google. Like, I don't trust Amazon reviews at all. They're all fake. Well, not all, like that's a pretty broad statement, but like, I mean, when I go on and to buy stuff, like it's so clear to me that like the majority of the ones I read are fake. Same with Facebook, doesn't even have a mechanism to report reviews. Like they're even worse than Google.
They're the
Like
worst.
it's so bad. Yeah. So like all the giant tech companies have this problem. So it's not specific to Google, and none of them are really doing a good job at solving it, other than Yelp, who I wouldn't probably call them a giant, but they are probably the only company that has actually done a decent job at preventing fake reviews. Like I don't think there's very many fake reviews of any of it at all.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Amazon. One of the things that Amazon can do definitionally is they can actually confirm a transaction. So like, I know you actually bought the coffee cup, right? Because you bought it on Amazon, and then I see that transaction. So you can have that confirmed purchaser. That does not exist outside in the service world, right?
I can tell you that doesn't solve it. I've gone down into the black hat world, seen how they do it. It is so easy to fudge that. It is so easy to even pay people to buy your product so that they can leave you reviews, which is well worth it long term. Like the amount that people do that, they think that the verified reviews, it kind of helps a bit. Maybe it's a little bit better, but it does not solve the problem because people have still found ways to game it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing that we should probably just at least mention for folks that aren't in this world is if you're a consumer of stuff on the internet, like take all these reviews with a huge grain of salt. I always tell people, I'm like, the negative reviews are probably more reliable than the positive reviews. But even that's a problem because people are, trying to hit up competitors with fake review attacks, negative fake review attacks. And so it's just a mess. And again, I'm not the Section 230 expert, at least Section 230 being the law that protects internet users in the United States. But in this context is protecting the platforms, because the easiest thing would be for a consumer to say, hey, look, I hired this lawyer from fake reviews and they screwed up my case and it cost me, whatever the consequence was, and then go sue Google. But Google's protected under Section 230. And we've had conversations with Professor Eric Goldman before. And, his point is like, look, this is the trade-off, right? Because if you get rid of it, if you don't have Section 230, right, then the internet fundamentally breaks. And I know that Congress, both, at least in the United States, all ends of the political spectrum are looking at this issue of the internet free speech issues and all this stuff. But this is one of those where it's a real problem, and it doesn't seem to be getting the kind of attention that it really needs from a consumer harm standpoint. Hopefully some state attorney general will pick this up or somebody, but or the FTC. But this is like, it's making all these reviews completely a mess.
Let me ask you a question on the agencies. I'm fascinated that this is very heavily agency driven. What's the culpability and downside for the agency, right? So you are an agency, you do this for your clients, right? What does that look like, Guy? I mean, is that a place where either of you see us attacking this problem?
Well,
I mean, you and I both know some agencies that do this, right?
Right. So you got a couple from a legal standpoint, you got a couple problems to overcome. Like first, if you're going to sue the agency, so say you represent a client and a competitor agency is, creating fake reviews on behalf of their client, you got to try to prove the harm to you, right? So again, the lawyer might be able to go to court and say, I'm suing this agency or bring a grievance because this is harming my business because they're using unfair and deceptive advertising.
That's my point.
But
yeah,
but to go after the agency and then, show me how you're going to prove that this agency did this, unless you've got the receipts on emails and transactions and stuff. Because you go to court, like you're gonna have to be like, because they're gonna be like, the agencies and the lawyers are gonna be like, it wasn't us, maybe it was a prior agency. I don't know who this was. You got the state, you got a standing issue, you got the harm issue, you got damages issue, you've got evidentiary issues. Now, for folks that have some experience with this, you can always subpoena Google, and if they're not careful about covering their tracks, like you can figure some of this stuff out. But the incentive to pursue that, lawyers aren't free. So you've also got to go and pay your lawyer to go fight these things. I don't know. I think it's got to come from some kind of regulatory change, some kind of enforcement action. But again, to Joy's point, like the lawyers are reluctant to do it, self-regulating under the state bar rules. Maybe the FTC or, state attorney general's offices will start taking this up. I'm a big fan of the work that Curtis is doing too. So hopefully that makes some difference. But like right now it just feels like, to Joy's point earlier, like you just look at these reviews and, you've got firms with thousands of reviews, hundreds of reviews that are, and then you go check the licenses of some of these solo practitioners and they're fresh out of law school. It's like, there's no way you didn't serve 100 personal injury clients in your first 6 months out of law school.
No, I remember there was a law firm from Florida that opened up in Seattle. They opened an office. They started doing bus signs. They didn't even have a lawyer licensed in Seattle, and they were getting, hundreds of reviews before they even opened.
And that's another ethical violation, likely, because they're advertising that they've got lawyers in a state where they don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a persuade. And look, you think one of these lawyers should be willing to take this up, right? Especially
that's what I was thinking, right? Like,
yeah,
you're the little guy in the big town, and you want to do a big link building opportunity, take it up, baby. Right.
Or you're the established lawyer who's doing it the right way, because you're the one who's actually, you've been making the investments in growing your business and trying to deliver great services to actually motivate people to leave positive reviews, which we all know is super hard, especially in certain practice areas in legal, right? Because no one wants to go on and talk about how their lawyer acquitted them for their DUI or helped them with their child custody case. And so, I think some of those, if you can find a lawyer who's willing to go to bat for it and really take this issue up, like that's probably one of the better solutions. But I don't know. I still think it's got to come from some kind of regulatory change and governmental consumer protection interaction. But, because again, it's not just law firms, as Joy mentioned, there's so many different industries that this is a huge problem. And again, it's like the media attention around it isn't, in our world, it's big, but like, this should be one of those like headline type of things. And it doesn't feel like it.
Joy,
have you guys seen that?
Guy and I live in this kind of blinders world of legal. Are you seeing a consumer mindset shift on you're not?
So that's what I was going to ask, because the media attention, I agree, is something that it's not there. Like there's been a few pieces done on Google and stuff like on the Wall Street Journal, but they weren't really heavily focused on reviews. They were focused on like fake listings and stuff and fraud in general. But like, have you guys seen businesses getting reported or outed in the media? And does that actually even do any damage? Like, does it negatively impact the business that gets reported for buying reviews?
Not enough. There are some isolated incidents of that happening, but it's obviously not enough to deter people from doing this, right? Because it's still proliferating at a remarkable rate. But I think at a local level, so like I think, again, I live in the law firm world. I think if you're in the local community, if you get a reputation for these fake reviews, whether it's on, even on social media, people are just talking about it, someone's got to publish it and out them. And that's the other thing too. People are reluctant. We see this in the SEO stuff all the time. Like no one wants to report on anybody. No one wants to use names. And so that's the problem. But at a local level, I think that if you get that reputation for faking reviews, like that could be a death knell for your local community. But, national wise, like, no, it's not working right now. It's not enough. It's not enough attention.
All right, Joy, I'm going to come back to that question. I'm a good, ethical little law firm doing the right thing. Do I give up on local if it's so jammed with fake reviews? Is this just a channel I walk away from?
No, goodness, you'd be crazy. But I do want to say that like outside of legal, we actually I have one case where I think that actually the owner did the right thing. And it was an electrician, and they have like really high standards, and they're very regulated in the area that this guy's in. And it was something as simple as like his competitor was using keywords in the business name, and they are really big on that. Like they have rules that say like you cannot advertise on anywhere without using like your actual legit name. And he reported the competitor to whatever, the people that police that, so like the equivalent of the state bar or whatever, and they enforced it. Like, so I know there are industries where they can't get away with this kind of crap, and it's kind of sad that the legal industry is not one of those.
I was going to say that's a pretty big indictment that we're doing a better job in electrical and plumbing and
Right.
HVAC than we are in legal.
But he
You
wasn't
gonna be
afraid
state
to
bar
do it.
regulator?
And I was like, good on you. Like, that's what I would say to these business owners, like listening, like you need to, if you want to survive, you need to do something. And I know it, like you said, nobody wants to be the tattletale, but at the same time, like it will negatively impact your business, not just because you can't compete, but the more fake reviews that exist in an industry, the harder Google makes it, because their algorithms are set up in a way to basically filter out reviews in industries more so than others. So for example, if you are in the garage door space, if you do garage door repair, one of the spammiest industries on Google, it is really hard to get your reviews to publish. Like if you have a client or customer leave you a real review, it is less likely to publish if you're a garage door business than if you're a restaurant, let's say, because there's more spam there. So the more fake reviews that exist with lawyers, the harder it's going to be for you to even get your real customers to be able to leave you reviews. Like it's in your better interest to fight this.
And that is an
Yeah.
industry penalty, not a business penalty.
That's right. It's applied across industries.
And I think I know some cases where they've reported it, and it's kind of even the same thing that's we talk about with Google. It's gone nowhere with the state bar. I mean, the state bars they're not sophisticated enforcement mechanisms like this. They're trying to focus on things like stealing client funds and, some of the worst lawyer behavior that you can imagine. And I think that they kind of think of this as like, yeah, it's a problem, but I don't think that they've really grasped, and they haven't had the headline consumer harm case. That's why I probably should have researched where the status of this is before this conversation. But there was a case in Pennsylvania where the client sued their lawyer because they were misled by the fake reviews. I hired this lawyer based on these fake reviews. And I don't know if that case settled or if it went up, but that's what it's going to take. It's going to take more of these consumer harms for it to get serious, because that's what everybody kind of shrugs and says, look, it's a problem. But, until that there are these people that are like coming forward and saying, look, I hired a lawyer and I wouldn't have hired this lawyer, and the lawyer screwed up my case and I suffered from it. It just gets deprioritized at the state bar level. But to the point of like, there are some of these grievances filed. I mean, even outside the context of the fake review stuff, like we see lawyers that will say, look, lawyers are eager to report them for things like violations of rules of professional conduct relating to like using superlatives in their ad copy and all that kind of stuff, and false and misleading ads and Google ads. And so I imagine that there's probably even more grievances filed than we even maybe think about. But the state bars, they're like, yeah, okay, yep, that's a problem, but they're not going out and taking lawyers' licenses away and making big headlines about this, at least not yet.
Which are the states, if you could name 3 states, Guy? You are closer to legal ethics than I am. I'm a marketing guy. So is Joy. So Joy and I we wallow in the muck of marketing. You are a high-minded licensed attorney. You're no longer licensed, right? Ex-licensed.
I'm still licensed. I'm still licensed.
Still licensed. All right, even better.
Yeah.
So you're closer to this. What 3 states do you think could be a vanguard for this?
Florida, Texas, California, South Carolina. I mean, it's a joy.
Oh, can you imagine California? Joy, what's the worst state in the nation? New Jersey? No, I meant for reviews, not for growing up. I grew up in New Jersey, Joy.
For reviews, probably California. Yeah. Although I do have an example in Texas. Actually, there's a guy I'm friends with on Facebook that's a personal injury lawyer in Dallas, I believe. And he's outing people on Facebook and tagging the Texas State Bar because they're so obvious. Like,
who is it? Let's give him some love.
Travis Peterson. I don't know if his last name is
Travis Patterson. Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Yep. He's making an effort,
which is great. I'm like, we need more people like him. And like the one I'm friends with him. So like the one example I was telling you with the LSA, where it was so obvious, and like I commented on there laughing at how ridiculous it is. The guy got like 6 reviews on Thanksgiving Day. And I also saw like a similar one where they were getting reviews at 3 a.m. on Christmas Day. And I'm like, yeah, okay, because people are up at 3 a.m. in the morning reviewing their lawyer on Christmas Day. Crazy, like, and multiple people, not just, you know, one
Right.
crazy person.
Okay. Last thoughts